Hello and welcome back to Wylder Brews. My name is Brian and today we are going to be talking about how to prepare and pitch your yeast for your brew day. So first, what we're going to need to find out is what kind of yeast you have. Is it dry yeast? Is it liquid yeast? What's the company? What's the brand? All this matters because there's a different amount of yeast cells per brand. Some of the big brands like Yeast or White Labs, when they give you your yeast, it comes with about 100 billion yeast cells. And this isn't really adequate for today's brewing. You can make a quick yeast starter, which we'll go into here in a second, or you can buy from a different yeast brand. And a couple of those are Giga Yeast and Imperial Yeast. I personally like to use these other brands because you save some money because they give you 200 billion yeast cells per pack. They're usually like $1 more than the Yeast and the White Labs, but you get more yeast cells per. So you're really saving a lot of money if you think about it. So if you do get the ones with 100 billion yeast cells, you're most likely you're going to want to make a yeast starter. To do that, you're going to want to mix some sugar with the yeast and set it aside to let it get started. So to do that, you get a little bit of malt extract or sugar or whatever you want to use, mixed with some water. You bring it up to a boil, and then you're going to cool it down to about the same temperature as your fermentation, 65 to 72 degrees, roughly around there. You're going to sanitize a jar that you want to hold it in, and then you're going to want to put that sugar water into that sanitized jar, and then you pull out your yeast from White Labs or Yeast, and you dump that in to that. Stir it around, make sure it's capped, but make sure that it has like an airlock on it, or if it's a mason jar, it's just open a little so air can get out. Just any basic fermentation process like that. You need a blow off for fermentation. So you take it, you put it away in a dark, cool spot, around 68 degrees is perfect, and you're gonna wanna let it go for a few days. You're gonna wanna stir it so that there's some oxygen movement in there so that the yeast can kind of wake up and start to multiply so you get more yeast cells. Or if you get from Imperial or from Giga Yeast, they sell, like I said, in 200 billion yeast cells. Those can pretty much go from pack into your wort when you're ready to ferment. If you are brewing a really big beer, like a triple IPA or a barley wine or something where it's just really heavy amount of sugar in there, that still might not be adequate with the 200 billion, so you're probably still going to need to make a yeast starter for that. Now, another thing I want to tell you about with using your yeast is reusing your yeast from your prior brew, from your prior fermentation. And this is a great way to save money. Again, you can totally do it. You don't want to do it more than once just because now you're running risk of contamination. But usually, for me anyhow, I didn't have any problems when I reuse it. There's a ton of yeast cells in there. They're all still very healthy. So what you're going to do is after your first fermentation from your brew a week or two ago, you're going to want to pull it out in your carboy, and you pull out the beer from first fermentation and throw it into your second carboy for second fermentation. So now you have your yeast left over in the bottom of your carboy. You're just going to want to swirl that around until you kind of break it all off in there. There's always a little bit of leftover beer that's in there, so that helps break it apart. And then you're going to want to grab your sanitized jar or whatever you're going to put it in, and you're going to pour that into your sanitized jar. And same thing, just kind of cap it. Make sure it's covered, but it's able to let off that gas. If you want, you can hold it in that fermentation room for a couple days, maybe 3 at the most, but you're just running risk of contamination at that point. So the best thing to do is use it right away. So those are my tips for how to start your yeast, prep your yeast, and pitch your yeast. See you next time.